Hey everyone, Ben Coomber Radio, episode number 238, and today is going to be very nutrition focused because I have a fellow nutritionist on the show, which is probably a little bit rare. We've had a huge amount of people on the show, people that are kind of athletes, people that are specialists, people that have done mindset. Not often do we have an out-and-out nutritionist, and we do today. This is someone that has a very good podcast himself. I've listened to several of his shows. I am a fan of his show, although we were talking before the podcast went on board that we don't always listen to nutrition in our own time. We listen to other stuff, we digest other information. His show is called Sigma Nutrition. It's very good. It has a lot of very geeky, very intelligent people, far more intelligent than me. Danny Lennon, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Ben. Thanks for having me on.
You are welcome. Danny, how long have you been doing your podcast?
It's probably 2.5 years. I think it was April 2014 when the first episode went up. So, yeah, wow. So about 2.5 years, I suppose.
Definitely. Wow. So, look, I want people to understand you. There's probably going to be some people on this that have already listened to some of your podcasts because they search for nutrition information. But I want people to understand who is Danny Lennon. Danny Lennon, who are you?
Okay, so to keep it brief, if people want to know a bit about my background, academically, I did an undergrad degree in biology and physics education. Following that, I spent a year teaching those subjects before going back and doing my master's in nutritional science. Then from there, as I started to try and just accumulate some more information, started my coaching practice, built up, started Sigma Nutrition with the idea of trying to just promote as much good quality, evidence-based information that people could then go and use. So really educational media content. And so at this point, the company really has kind of two separate branches that we see. One would be that content or that educational media we try and put out via the podcast or via videos and articles. We do quite a lot of seminars as well in gyms. We run our own independent seminars and conferences. And then on the other side would be our coaching service, which is working one-on-one online with people. And so, yeah, that's kind of the very basics of where I am. I'm happy to dive into any specifics that you might have.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So one question I've got, quickly first. So how many years have you actively been coaching clients like one-to-one?
So it probably would have started whilst I was in college. So that was maybe, we're looking at over 4 years maybe, I guess somewhere in that region.
Okay.
Of actually taking one-to-one clients, yeah.
Okay, so in those 4 years, and it might stem back earlier, because the reason why I asked this question is my practice has gone through a lot of evolution over the last 10 years. And I'm interested how your approach to your practice, your approach to coaching your clients has changed from 4 years ago, when you probably knew an awful lot then, to how it looks kind of now. So kind of compare those two approaches for me and almost what we and the listeners can learn from your change of approach as a practitioner.
Yeah, I think the biggest one is probably what most people go through is that once they start to get a small amount of knowledge, you almost presume that you have enough or you found the answer to help everyone. And I know certainly that was the way I was when I first started getting really interested in nutrition stuff. And started applying some of it with myself before I even ever started studying it formally. Started finding things that were working, learned more, was reading a bit of science because I was doing a biology degree. And so really as my own kind of hobby in my own time, I was looking at sports nutrition research to try and help myself as an athlete. And so I started to find things that were working, played around with different dietary approaches. And then when stuff does start to work, the big trap is to fall into is like, okay, I've got the answer now. And now this is, if I just was able to use this with everyone, then everyone would get these results. And almost to a point of not understanding why we have the issues we do in the general society with people's health and the prevalence of, say, overweight and obesity. It's like, look, I found this. If we just use this with everyone, it's gone, right? And the biggest thing for me is when you start working with people and you start to see all the different nuance and context and how giving someone certain recommendations actually plays out in real life for different people, you start then realizing okay, maybe this isn't the answer that will work for every single person. And so the biggest, I would say, change is that I no longer have maybe a standard template or a default stance that we go with everyone. It's more working out first, okay, who is this person? Not only their needs and their goals, but like what will they respond best to? How will it be best to program this stuff with them? And then from there work backwards and then start to give different recommendations. So like within the past couple of years, we've had clients who have been on vegan diets, ketogenic diets, super high carb, low fat diets, diets that are cycling calories, ones that people are not even tracking macros, like every single different approach for different types of clients. And I think that's been the biggest thing of like, okay, we have to find something that works for this person as opposed to this is the Sigma nutrition way and how do we enforce this on someone? Does that make sense?
I'll be honest, that wasn't the answer that I was expecting you to give me. So I'm going to ask you, because in my experience, over the last 10 years, all I've done is simplified. It's like I knew so much 10 years ago, probably even, I'd say, probably a big turning point was about 6 years ago, where I knew an awful lot. I just finished the CISSN certification, had only just finished my degree, I'd done an awful lot of hands-on research at university and stuff, and everything I did was so flipping complicated for everyone. And I think all I've done over the last 6 years is I've just boiled it down to almost like 5 things that I'll really hone in on with a client, because I know that if I get those 5 things right, I get massive impact.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, this is one of the things we kind of been discussing off air of oftentimes people are looking for something like super detailed, thinking that it has to be detailed, right? And so we've not only had clients like that, but I suppose initially early on in my coaching days, which is kind of alluding to the same point that you're getting at, is this one of the big issues I was having was dumping too much information on clients all at once. Because when you learn something new, and I'm sure for like any PTs listening, they get the same idea. When you learn something new and it's exciting because we're interested in nutrition, right? We're interested in fitness. We're interested in the science behind it and exercise physiology. So when we learn this new stuff, it can be so exciting that all you want to do is like dump all this stuff on someone and say, look, do this, this, and this, because look at all these cool things that happen. When really people don't care about most of that stuff and it just becomes too much for them to consume. So I would certainly agree that one of the big things is not to overload people with information, especially when it may not be relevant, right? A lot of the background stuff of why certain things are working may not be relevant for most of the clients. So I would agree with that point for sure of distilling things down.
So with that point in mind, if someone walked up to you at a bus stop and said, Danny, give me 3 tips on how I can improve my health and body composition, what would you tell them to go away and focus on out of all the things that they could change? Just maybe 3 things that you think has the biggest impact on everything.
Number 1, I would say, would be sleep.
Yes.
So I'm huge on sleep. It's one of the things I often end up saying to people that really it's probably, even if it at least as important as nutrition, but possibly even more so when you look at some of the health effects of very poor or sleep restriction over a long period of time. So I'd say try and get as much sleep as is allowable by their schedule or is practical, ideally at regular times if possible. And then there's a whole other stuff of how to actually help someone make that happen. But sleep would be one. I think for general kind of population, we see that I would think that protein intakes tend to be quite low, in that generally some of the changes that end up happening when someone increases their protein intake, if it is very low, you tend to see lots of knock-on effects that tend to be useful for people. So we know, for example, that people are trying to generally lose a bit of weight. If they up their protein, it generally increases their satiety levels. They end up probably eating less over the day. And even if not, then we have a host of other impacts of when you think of the food choices someone needs to make. If they're going to include more high protein foods, they tend to be relatively good choices. So those would be the 2, I suppose, a nutrition one and a sleep one. And then I suppose to round it off, you'd probably go with something like general activity. And this would be something outside of training, because I think there's so many health benefits that we see to being an overall active person, but sometimes people can conflate that with someone who does a lot of training or spends like every day goes to the gym. Training for 1 hour in the gym 5 days a week is a great start, and you can get tons of benefits. But generally being active throughout the day and not just sitting in one spot can, we know independently outside of actual training session, can have a lot of benefit for people. So they would be 3 kind of entry level things that I'd probably start people with as like something quick to take away.
I don't want to sound like I'm being a teacher's pet or something, but I would have done the exact 3 points.
Nice.
And I think the last point that you made, I'm interested, what do you do in your lifestyle? Because if I am not concentrating on it, I would say I'm quite sedentary. I go to the gym and I train very hard when I train at the gym, but otherwise I work from home, so I have the potential to sit on my ass for 6, 8, 10 hours a day. What do you do in your lifestyle to try and make yourself as active as possible? Because I'm assuming you're quite similar to me in that respect.
Yeah, and I should put the preface on this that I'm no way perfect on it, and I'm the same. I'll have super busy days where, as you know, could be spending a lot of time on the laptop, and then I end up not doing as much. So things that I try to do to help me get out of that is just have set regular intervals throughout the day where I know I'm going to be getting up to go somewhere. So it might be something as simple as instead of making myself a coffee down right outside the office, I might say, okay, I'm going to go down somewhere. I'll go for a walk. It might take me 20 minutes. I'll pick up a coffee, walk back with it. At least that's 20 minutes of just movement and getting out of there. As I am right now, I have a standing desk, so that tries to have some sort of impact as opposed to not sitting all the time. Here beside me I also have like a treadmill that pops in the desk that I don't use as frequently, but is kind of cool to use now and again. But more so it's just being probably aware of it and, okay, how many times throughout this day am I going to be able to get up and do something? And so probably the most useful is at the start of the workday when I'm planning out what I've got to do. I like to then insert, okay, when am I going to be training? Therefore, when am I going to be traveling back and forth between the gym? Put all that stuff in. When am I going to have, say, what blocks of work do I have to do? And then consciously have a schedule. Okay, when I'm having these breaks, where am I going to be for those, and what can I do? So things like that. I mean, it doesn't have to be overly complex, and like we said earlier, the more simplified it is, the better. So I think really could be just at the start of someone's day, just thinking about, okay, where are 3 time points where I'm going to get up and do something active, even if that's a 5-minute walk is all you can manage because you're busy. We know that has some sort of benefit. So something that really is as simplified as that. I've don't any special tactics.
No, mate, that's fine. And hopefully people will pick up some, guiding points. And I think if anything, a lot of what my podcast is about is just not maybe shoving a knowledge bomb down someone's throat, but it's just letting a spark go off in someone's brain to say, I could do that, and it stimulates an idea, because I like people to come up with their own inspiration rather than me being this kind of objective shining light of inspiration, because the inspiration needs to come internally for it to mean something really powerfully. Can you multitask by typing? You mentioned you got a walk-in treadmill desk thing. Can you type and walk at the same time?
I can. I've actually found it that the typing isn't the issue. It's more of when I'm moving the mouse around quite a lot, it can get quite difficult, because one of my other kind of productivity hacks was I have the mouse speed turned up as fast as I can, so it flies around the screen quite fast. So that can be difficult. So it depends on what work I try to do. So if it's more something where I have to be doing stuff quite fast, I'll probably just do it like standing here now, or I'll have a stool that I'll sit on. But if it's just kind of stuff that I can be flicking through, like reading some emails, something simple like that, or like typing a post that's going to go up later on, I can do that pretty well standing. I've kind of got used to it.
I haven't tried it, but to me it felt like one of those things like tapping your head and rubbing your belly kind of thing.
Yeah, it's surprisingly easier than I thought it would be. I'm going slow enough, so.
So when we were doing the intros to this, you mentioned evidence-based practice, and I think currently right now this is a really interesting kind of hot word between a lot of practitioners, and a lot of practitioners are, I feel, being quite forceful using this word, and it kind of, for a lot of people out there, it kind of indicates that everything is black and white, and nothing is black and white. There's all sorts of grey. We all have real lives, stress, problems, dynamics. Where do you kind of, because you're an evidence-based practitioner, you follow the evidence, you've done a degree, you're very clever, but you are a practicing nutritionist. You see people, you identify with problems. How do you think we need to kind of swallow this conversation of evidence-based practice but versus real-world application? Where does it all come together?
Right. Yeah, this is a really interesting topic. It's something I've thought an awful lot about over the past year or two, I suppose. I actually wrote a blog post entitled "When is evidence-based to evidence-based?" or something to that effect, because I think sometimes people can push it too far if they don't realize what the concept is supposed to be, in that it's not saying evidence only, or that we need definitive research on every single recommendation we're going to give, because if we try to get to that point, you end up just doing nothing. And I see it now online quite a lot. People are almost afraid to say things that could actually be a useful recommendation to someone, because they're fearful of someone coming and saying, well, where's your evidence for that? Where's your list of research? Do you know what I mean? It becomes very to the point where people get frozen into inaction because they're so petrified that they need definitive research to back things. So where the way I think of like evidence-based practice, the way it should be is that, yes, all our recommendations should have a foundation in evidence. So if we have evidence clearly showing that this old ideology is completely incorrect and doesn't work, then we can discard that. Or if we have something that shows a recommendation is going to enhance some or be a useful recommendation, we can use that. But if there's things that maybe haven't been researched, for example, that people have been using in practice, we can't just discard them because there's no evidence. Because, and the kind of old phrase of absence of evidence is not the same thing as evidence of absence, right? So this thing could have a benefit. So it's, I like Brad Schoenfeld has a lovely Venn diagram he used to show evidence-based practice of where it's using evidence, but overlayered on top of that is the individual needs of the person and then the experiences of the coach as well. And this kind of intersection of those 3 points can be really useful way to think of it. I think just as a kind of side tangent, I maybe don't want to go down this route too much, but I think from what I've seen online, some people are using, like you're saying, this evidence-based term almost as a way to brand themselves to try and gain credibility. And none of what they're doing is actually evidence-based, right? And it's probably a bigger idea of critical thinking is a huge thing that I've tried to think about quite a lot recently, in that so many people use it, but it's almost become a cliche, because when you look at what they're doing, they're not becoming critical thinkers, right? They're critical over people they don't agree with. Mm-hmm. But then when one of their people who's maybe within the evidence-based community, who they think is untouchable, that everything they say is amazing, they never critically think about what that person just said. Or maybe there's some different context to this. Maybe we can debate some of these ideas. Instead, it's, okay, this person said it, so it must be true. So anyone that says something different must be a charlatan or a guru, you know? And I think people are not kind of critically evaluating both sides. So I've tried to do that even with people that I respect and I think have really good ideas. I still try and think about, okay, is there something different to this? Is there, maybe we can find some use for something that isn't technically evidence-based? And there's probably a lot there. And I will say one final thing. When people are talking about recommendations into an individual client, it becomes very different, right? So, because I've seen arguments online of, I may talk about having a client who has been recommended and they're using a low carbohydrate diet, for example. And then someone will say, well, isn't it true that if you just match their calories and protein, they could have more carbs and do just as well? And yeah, that is technically true. So, but that's not the point here. For this individual person, maybe the low carb approach is useful for them and they enjoy eating that way, or they find it easier to stick to that overall calorie target because of the food choices imposed, and little nuances like this. So it's just a pet peeve of mine when people try and go overboard and need validation for every single thing that someone says. And typically you see it's people who haven't worked with a lot of individuals in real life, I just find. But at the same time, I do think evidence-based practice is our best starting point, and I am a big fan of evidence-based practice. It's what we use with our coaching, but understanding that evidence-based practice is not the same thing as evidence only, or we need a paper for every single thing we say to someone.
No, and I totally echo your thoughts. And I think the problem with the growth of social media has meant that everyone's been able to have a voice, when potentially we could argue that some people need to earn the right to have that voice in some contexts. But people are not, if people want to provide information for other people, they need to think through that information very clearly. So you could take a evidence-based statement and put it up online, which might be a very generalised sweeping statement, and then everyone underneath it who's trying to apply that to their context is going to really struggle. So they either discard that or take that on board as gospel, whether it works for their context or not. And all of a sudden they become a zealot for that statement, whether it worked for them or not. And I think we as practitioners have a responsibility to add this context to the people to help. Like you just said, if I start to talk about calories and say, well, just make your protein okay and then do this, well, that's not the only thing. We need to think about, someone might have poor glycemic response, great. So they shouldn't have a high carb diet. So we do need a low carb diet, but we still need to make it calorie controlled. So I think for me, I'd like to see more people making an effort to add this context, because that's what actually helps people.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing of people seeing these snippets of something that someone has said, either in a post online or in an article, and then they start saying, well, this person said X, but that's not true, because look at these scenarios where that doesn't play out. But then they're not really looking at, well, the way that the person meant it. And I see it all the time. There's people that are essentially just fans of certain fitness or nutrition people, and just will regurgitate what that person says without even understanding it, and will go against people who have maybe different ideas purely on that basis that it's not something they've heard. And it's just a fake layer of the evidence, of pretending to be evidence based where they're not really.
When I teach my seminars, when I have a group of people in front of me, I always say to people, look, I hope that you will agree with 95% of the information that I tell you today. Hopefully I am on point, but there should be 5 to 10% that you think, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure if I agree with Ben, or based on my environment or in my context. And again, it comes back to critical thinking. That allows you to go away and say, right, I agreed with most of Ben, but there's a couple of things here, and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to spend some time researching it. I'm going to look up a couple of other opinions, maybe look on Google Scholar, because that then shapes us as people and allows us to start to really include that context into our environment. Because I won't be right about everything, and I might not be right about everything for that person.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's huge. And one of the biggest things is being able to have open discussions, which I think is where maybe a lot of the time within the fitness industry we fall down, in that people, just because there's opposing ideas, almost feel, or sometimes I think people just want there to be just massive arguments between people, instead of saying, okay, here's some opposing ideas, let's maybe hash this out and see, here's the reasons why this person has this person has this, and then people can make a judgment call. And really, when someone does have good solid evidence for or against something, they will typically then, most people say, well, look, this person's probably idea is correct. Maybe someone else might change their idea, which is completely fine. I don't know how many things I've changed my idea completely on over the last couple of years. And every time I've come out and said, I was completely wrong, and here's the reasons why. And I think that's a good thing. But yeah, there's just a lot of probably the way people go about it when there is a disagreement in certain ideas. I think just an openness and not being, I suppose, overly aggressive with people, particularly if someone is like posting a reply to something I say and someone is trying to understand and learn new information. You have to remember, some people may not have came across the things that we've learned. So if someone hasn't read the research paper that I read, or hasn't studied certain areas that I have, and maybe has just read one book on a certain topic and now believes that, and they come and start saying, no, you're wrong because of this. If I come back and be super aggressive with that person, telling them they're an idiot, then they're just going to go away and they're not going to listen to me whatsoever, as opposed to trying to say, get to the root of, okay, why do you believe this? okay, I believe the opposite because of this, this, and this. So a lot can be said, I think, for the way we go about different discussions.
I think because of the internet is this thing that once you post something, you assume everyone's read it. And right. I have this thing in the back of my mind that if someone writes a comment on my Facebook page, I assume that this is the first one of my Facebook pages they've ever seen. And it is my job to give them the appropriate answer, because then I don't have any preconceived ideas. I don't say, oh, well, quote my post last week on Facebook at 3:40. Like, they're not going to know that. And I think if we all had that approach, we'd be helping a lot more people in fitness.
Yeah, completely agree.
So, moving on, you have a brilliant podcast, which I've listened to a good handful of episodes on, and you've had a lot of people that have come from a huge background of specialties. Some people that are looking at really specific things, researchers in certain areas. And I'm intrigued, as to someone that's been exposed to so much brilliance, could we boil down and extract from your brain maybe 5 things that have stuck with you, or maybe had the most impact on you, or maybe the most impact on your listeners from all those people?
Okay, cool. So we could go 2 ways with this. We could go quite practical stuff of some things that I've learned. So I'll maybe give those in a minute. First, I'd probably say something more abstract in one thing that hit me just from all these different people, the same kind of theme that would come up that I think goes against a big mistake a lot of people make early on, is that the people that you see at the top of these fields and at the top of nutrition are not worrying about the tiny minutiae of details that don't have much of a practical impact on their lives. They're aware of so much information, but they're not worried about the tiny little details that I used to get worried about, and that I know people, when they start learning some of this stuff, get worried about, to the point where every single food choice becomes a stress because it has to be perfect in every single way. And everything, and all these different things we can talk about, these different concepts around nutrition, where people really start focusing on the minutiae of details and forget about the big picture stuff. It's like we were talking about, like, are you sleeping enough at night? Are you generally active? Is your overall diet decent quality from decent quality foods? You're covering off most of the bases there, but people instead are stressing over tiny little details. And just from talking to a lot of the people that you see at the top of these fields, whether they're practitioners or researchers, they know that, like, within the context of overall good quality lifestyle and diet, that tiny little details aren't worth the stress that a lot of people are emphasizing. So that's one kind of more abstract one that I've just noticed right across the board with people. In terms of big practical takeaways, I think a lot kind of ties into that as well. I think sleep has been covered a huge number of times, just how important that is, getting good quality sleep. Obviously, we talked about activity. I'm a big fan of people doing some form of resistance training, which has been kind of a theme through a lot of them. From a nutritional standpoint, the same thing, like, of, yes, calories matter, and beside that then macronutrients matter, but so does the food quality and how you structure it, because one big idea that I think never gets discussed when people are kind of comparing the two sides is that one generally will influence the other. So sure, if someone eats the exact same calories and macros in 2 different types of diets, and one is, say, more heavily processed food and one is good quality food, the differences in the short to immediate term on, say, body composition are probably going to be 0, right? You're probably going to get the same change in body composition. But it's about, in the real world, when you tell someone to base their food choices on these good quality foods most of the time, how that influenced the likelihood of them hitting certain amounts of calories and macronutrients, adhering to that, generally feeling healthy, influencing their sleep. And then we know things like, then in turn, sleep restriction can affect someone's food choices, and there are gut hormones like ghrelin that will allow them or want them to eat more the following day. So it's all this stuff that has a knock-on effect that isn't directly related, but probably in some way. So I don't know if that answers, but I think it just, to me, the biggest thing is that it's not the minutiae of details, it's those big things of, like, eat at a calorie and macronutrient level that suits your goal, make most of good quality food, get enough sleep, be active, try and decrease stress as much as possible. The stuff that people say over and over again, And then where the kind of probably more nuanced stuff comes in is probably like in a sports nutrition application process. But for the average person, it really is much more simple.
So if you were to maybe, or has there been one or two things, and I love that, by the way, has there been one or two things where you thought, do you know what, I did not freaking know that? It was such a little pearl of maybe research or a mechanism where you were like, that's really freaking cool. I'm right now going to write that down.
Yeah, there's been a few. I'm trying to think of some good ones off the top of my head. The first one that's coming to mind probably because it's one of the more recent ones. I had Chris Masterjohn on my show talking about
nice.
Advanced glycation end products and glycation of certain proteins, which was his area of study. Got into some, probably one of the nerdiest, probably if not the nerdiest show that I've probably done to date. It was really in depth, but one of the big things that I hadn't even realized probably up to then is the effect then of, say, overall carbohydrate intake, and people talking about how, or traditionally what people would have discussed as one of the big problems with it is its effect on causing glycation or potential for increased amounts of advanced glycation end products. And Chris was kind of breaking down how that's not the amount of carbohydrate in the diet really isn't going to affect the overall amount of AGEs to any significant result, because most of that is going to be endogenously produced, as opposed to people taking in, say, AGEs via their diet, which is people get worried over. So that was kind of a cool thing, because I never thought about too much of that stuff in much detail.
So just to make that relevant to the audience, does that mean that Chris Masterjohn was almost adding enough context to that to say, don't focus too much on what might seem like minutiae there, make your diet really high quality?
Basically, yeah, pretty much. So, I mean, that's exactly it. It's like, that was a great example of where people are wondering, okay, should I have carbs? Should I have no carbs in my diet? And if someone is getting so focused on, they'll read a certain book and say, oh, well, I'm not going to have any carbs because I heard if you have more carbs, then it can cause glycation of these certain proteins. Like this tiny little detail that, and when he lays out, it's like, it's not really going to have any meaningful effect. Like it's just something theoretical, and it's not a valid reason for someone to restrict carbohydrate. So, that's a pretty good example, I think.
Fascinating. It reminds me, actually, I went to a conference about 4 or 5 years ago with, I don't know, I can't remember, but it was basically all the top researchers that were studying disease all around the world came together in London. This was a huge conference. It must have been like 1,000 people there in London. And all these people were talking about really specific stuff like particles affecting other things, affecting certain pathways that could lead to cancer. And literally every one of them across the 3 days ended their talk by saying, do you know what you should all do? You should all have lots of fruits and vegetables in your diet.
Right.
And that's basically what they're saying, that the health of the diet, the level of vitamin, mineral, antioxidant, phytonutrient, cofactors, probiotics is the most important thing. So all of that geeky stuff I just told you for an hour, that's cool, but eat loads of fruits and vegetables.
Right, yeah. It's covered in most, like, these practical recommendations are based on all this kind of cool stuff we're looking at. So yeah, it's really interesting to see how simplified it can be.
So wrapping up the show a little bit, there was one other thing that I wanted to talk to you on, because your head is in nutrition. You read research, you see the field evolving, I'm assuming to a certain degree. You're a busy man, so your head is not in probably current media and social media as much as some people. But I'm interested to see what you think is coming in the world of health, fitness and nutrition. Like, what do you see in terms of information or research or technology that you think you see coming that you think is actually quite cool?
Yeah, I think it's going to be something that's going to be tech-based. I think there's so much really cool stuff within the tech sphere that is even emerging out there now, and lots of startups that are doing some cool things within the context of say, sports nutrition. Of what I've seen, I was at a conference recently where it was a tech-based conference, but just looking at some of the sports nutrition-related and sports performance type stuff. For me, I think where the real exciting stuff that's going to emerge over time is when all of the stuff that is now out there in terms of technologies that are collecting data on someone's diet and their performance, when that starts to get all integrated into one place in a usable manner for people as well, in that the data has to be giving someone information that they can actually use. Because right now there's a lot of stuff that collects cool data that's interesting to see, but how much of it actually will cause someone to change something that's going to give a benefit is very different. I think it's starting to emerge, but I think it has to be very much an integrated approach. You're probably starting to see some of that at like the top levels of sport, where their teams will be collecting these huge amounts of data and then using that in a practical way with players. So I think I was actually at a talk recently where Clive Woodward was talking about when he was involved with the England rugby team, and how for a lot of their data collection and analysis, they would have the players take their own laptop, download the software to view all the stuff of the game and the data and the game analysis that they would have collected, and start making their own recommendations based off the back of it before discussing it with the head coach and the sports science team. So I think things like that is going to be useful, of where us as consumers or athletes can start using all these different pieces of information. But I think it has to be integrated all together in a way that's actually going to impact someone's performance. So that what that solution will be, I'm not exactly too sure yet. I think there's some cool stuff out there, but I think that's probably more for someone involved in the tech space to probably answer. In terms of research, stuff I'm interested in is on the health side. I think still the gut microbiome is so much more to look at. I think that's just only getting started of where we could end up with those recommendations. Obviously, nutrigenetics and nutrigenomics has a long way to go, but it's really, really interesting. I'm fascinated about how that can play out. And then with sports nutrition, I think a lot of the stuff on the glycogen availability training, so stuff, say, someone like James Morton would be doing on using periods of low carbohydrate training or training with low glycogen levels to get an adaptation for an athlete that will then go and compete with full glycogen levels. Stuff like that I think is really interesting, and I'm particularly interested to see where that comes out in terms of practical performance markers, because as of yet most of it is looking at, say, mechanistic stuff. So on the research side, that's it. Yeah, so I think they're the areas I'm most excited about, to be honest.
Okay. Interesting. I'm quite interested to see, because tech is changing the face of nutrition, I think, a lot. People are wearing watches that are telling them their activity. The watch is soon going to that person will probably eat a meal. The watch will probably recognise the amount of calories that were in that meal.
Yeah.
Say that you've got 1,000 left for the day, your watch will probably end up saying, oh, actually your blood levels of magnesium are a bit low, you should be taking on board more magnesium rich foods, or you should supplement. And actually I wonder whether that'll affect almost our job security in a way. But when you think about it, most people know what a healthy diet is. Real food, fruits and vegetables, be consistent, junk food's bad, eat broccoli instead of crisps. So whether technology actually changes people's ability to apply that information, I don't know. Technology is obviously making it easier and a lot more, do this, don't do that, you can't eat that, you shouldn't eat this. So I'm kind of interested to see where the consumer will almost make parts of the nutrition industry redundant.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, I think. And some people may be thinking that what you just said is kind of a bit out there, but it's certainly not. I think that's within the realms of possibility in a very short space of time, for sure. That type of technology will be available. And I think for me, what's interesting is, again, like you said, when we try and practically apply this, what knock-on changes does it have? Is there potential that some of these technologies could negatively affect someone who maybe typically never used to stress over things, used to generally eat pretty good, and doesn't worry about things, and that in itself is healthy for them. Yeah. And now maybe starts to get overly stressed about small little changes or seeing day to day on these on data analysis that may not actually impart any benefit, or the slight negative that's on this data set may not have any practical detriment to them, and the stress they cause by thinking about it may be very different. I've seen this, like, anecdotally, people using heart rate variability with their training, for example. People that don't use it may have came up that they score a red or like a bad score a day that you should take off from training. If they don't know that ever came up and they didn't have that score, Some people go in when they're tired and have a great training session. Now, that's not for me to say that it's not valid to use HRV. I think it'd be a really, really good tool, but I think it's very much dependent on the person and their mindset. And so maybe some of these technologies are the same. But like you said, it's all how do people apply this information. It's not a lack of information with people's diets, because people that have the worst diets, it's not down to not knowing that food is bad or the food industry sneaking it into them. It's they know what stuff they shouldn't be eating. It's just how do you practically stop that when you're super stressed, tired all the time, already overweight, already got these hunger sensations, etc., etc. How do you practically program to stop yourself wanting to eat that? So whether technology can solve that, we'll see.
I think if any companies that are listening are producing this technology, they now really have a social responsibility to educate the consumer in the right way, in that we don't see more and more orthorexic behaviour, because that's the risk. Like you said, like, oh my God, I've gone 100 over my calorie intake today. Like, what do I do? Do I quickly go for a run? Do I eat less tomorrow? Like, we don't want people getting to that place. Like, it's not that big a deal. You could maybe, yes, eat less 3 mouthfuls tomorrow, but it's nothing to develop anxiety over. And there's a lot of people that seek that kind of control in their lifestyle. There is a control mechanism, and I think the companies that produce this tech have a massive social responsibility. Yeah,
it's completely true, because one thing I said to people quite a lot is that on paper, the most nutritious diet isn't technically the healthiest diet or the healthiest way of eating, because there's so much around how we eat that is separate to the micronutrient density of a certain type of food, the social environment we're in, the mood we're in when we're doing it, how we view and enjoy foods. All these things matter. And the same thing happens in this context. If someone is doing certain behaviors, and we already see this without tech, right? When people start talking about tracking macronutrients, this can be a great tool to get people in the right ballpark of overall diet. But now you have people stressing over they ate 87 grams of fat instead of 85 and losing their mind, or people having half a digestive biscuit to hit their carb intake. Crazy stuff like this. And we've already seen a precedent for it when people can take a good concept and stretch it too far. And so I think that is a danger, but I think it's something that will probably happen whether it's going to be tech-based or not. And it's just trying to kind of warn people against that.
Right, Danny, I'll wrap up the show because I said it would be 30-40 minutes and I want to respect your time. You've probably got something going on at past. Danny, just want to say thank you for keep doing what you're doing with the podcast and stuff, because you're adding to the industry, you're adding good information to the industry. So just want to throw some credit your way, because I've followed your stuff. I've learned some stuff off you. I don't listen to your podcast religiously. I now and again hit up some of your episodes that look interesting that I want to learn. So thank you for doing what you're doing. I know after today, there's going to be some people going to find you and listening to your stuff, which I think is awesome. So people can find you, where's the best place to send them to you from today?
Perfect. First, thanks so much for the kind words, Ben. It means a lot to hear that. And for people listening, if they want to look for the podcast, just go on to whatever app they're using, whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, whatever. Just look for Sigma Nutrition Radio. And then everything else they can find on the website, which is just sigmanutrition.com. And that will give them all the information about everything else that I do and what's up there and where to find me, email address, etc. So that's just sigmanutrition.com.
Amazing. What about social media?
Social media, I'm on Instagram. They search Danny Lennon _ Sigma Nutrition. Twitter, Nutrition Danny, and just Facebook, just search for Sigma Nutrition, or I'm sure my own page is up there somewhere, which is not so private anymore. So any of those places is fine for people to contact me.
Awesome. Well, for everyone listening, I hope you've enjoyed this. This will go up on all the social networks as usual. If you would like to chat and engage with us, me and Danny both put a lot of information out there. Tweet us back, message us on Facebook, just connect with us. Connect with Danny if you have found this information interesting. Evolve the conversation. There might be something in this podcast that you agreed with. There might be something you disagree with. Again, start up the conversation. Engage with us and we will engage back. Again, thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this, please leave a review on iTunes if you have never done so before. It would mean a lot to me. I know over 600 people have done it, but thousands of you listen to this show. Please leave a review if you have not done so already. And if you see it on Facebook, Twitter, etc., and you want to share the love, hit like, hit retweet, and share the love. I will be on next week with Zana doing a Christmas special. Otherwise, I will see you next week. And for everyone, take care. And Danny, thank you finally.
Thanks so much, mate.
And for everyone listening, stay awesome. Hey everyone, Ben Coomber Radio, episode number 237. Now, there's an upward trend on the show.